is on Project Recode, the City Zoning Commission. And so it's like members of the public who are able to be here today. For those things, it looks like we all know what we're here to talk about. And we have a public call-in number that I guess I'll repeat multiple times through this meeting so that people know that's the public call-in number is 237-6120. This meeting is being broadcast both on Facebook Live and on Community 7. So go there for all of your needs. Again, the phone number to call in is 237-6120. And does that take us to the public comment? All right, so okay. How about we introduce ourselves? I'm Greg McCall, and here you go, here.
I'm Trina White.
I'm Nicole Cromwell, the zoning coordinator.
I'm Dan Bruss with the Billings Chamber of Commerce.
I'm Jack King.
We have several other planning staff members in the audience, including planning director Wyatt Friday, Monica Flecker, planning division manager, Jeanette B, planning assistant, and Robin Barley, who will be taking our minutes for this evening.
Thank you. And then that leaves only like 4 other people. So if you'd like to get up and introduce yourselves to Lane, Miles, Brandon. Everybody's here, Randy's here, Mike's here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Does anybody have any public comment for anything that is not on the agenda for this evening?
We're
Surprise.
about 1 minute behind on Facebook, so we could a little bit of time for people to call into that number.
Okay, so we're 1 minute behind, so you've got 1 minute to get in on this. 237-6120. Call in now. It does, it's a help. We're actually collecting your zoning pledges that really help us launch this baby good. Okay. Anybody got a good joke? No, not really. Anything coming in over there, Rob? No? Okay. All right, not hearing any public comment, we'll go on to the regular business. We'll open the public hearing for these 2 items that we're going to be discussing this evening. The text amendment for Project Recode, the proposed draft sections of 27-300 and 27-1000. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Ms. Nicole.
Thank you. I'm going to use this one time and then I'm just going to shout it out because I think you all can hear me, and hopefully the mics in the room will pick me up as well. But the order for tonight's hearing is that I'll make a short presentation to the board and answer their questions on the specifics of those 2 sections of the code. The short presentation will cover all the proposed new residential zones and kind of highlight some of those areas where we did some changes, and then take questions from the board. Then public comment will be taken by the board, and suggestions or recommendations, concerns, any of those things can be voiced at tonight's hearing. Our consultant team is on both in the house, Randy Hafer, and on our Zoom meeting. So if the Zoning Commission wants to, you can start telling our consultant team on those suggestions on different sections of the code of what needs to be adjusted or corrected, and we can start creating a spreadsheet, so to speak, of those recommendations. So anyway, with your indulgence, I'll now start a short presentation to the board.
Thank you, Nicole.
Sure.
As we go through this procedurally, we anticipate us voting at any time during this meeting tonight, tomorrow night, next night?
Unless
When will that
the
take
voting
place?
place,
And
well, yeah.
Will we vote in a chunk or by line item or?
I don't expect that the zoning commission will do wordsmithing. In other words, saying specific word here needs to be deleted and add this word there. That if there's some general consensus on the board, that you would make a motion to say, we recommend this section of 27304 be changed to say this instead. You could do that. I don't anticipate you making those motions tonight, but you could certainly have those discussions, and that we will start collecting all of that information, and that we'll probably end up having 6 or more sessions of this public hearing, touching on each section, major section of the code. And at the end, we come back, look at that list that you've created, and then you would do your voting and make a recommendation to the city council. Does that make sense to you?
It does, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to have to minimize screen here. Maybe the mouse works. Sitting down. I lost the mouse. Okay, I need a tech. Oh, there it is. Fine. There we go. Okay, so tonight's hearing, we're starting where we do most of our planning work and zoning work, and that's in our residential zone for the city of Billings. The city of Billings is 80% plus residential uses. There's all kinds of neighborhoods everywhere across our community. And so that's where we're going to start. But where we really started, maybe, was learning how to use tech. No. Was the growth policy that the city of Billings adopted in 2016. And that growth policy statement and goal for the city laid out what we needed to do in planning to help meet that goal. And that policy statement is on the screen here. It's in your packet of information, but I'll just take the time to read it for the audience. And it says, in the next 20 years, Billings will manage its growth by encouraging development within and adjacent to existing city limits, but preference will be given to areas where city infrastructure exists or can be extended within a fiscally constrained budget and with consideration given to increased tax revenue from development. The city will prosper with strong neighborhoods with their own unique character that are clean, safe, and provide a choice of housing and transportation options. So that gave us the foundation to start our work, which we began in June of 2017 with the City County Planning Board, appointing a steering committee of 20 people from our community that worked with planning staff to come up with a framework to start. There are 7 guidelines within that growth policy, and those are in your packet tonight and on the screen here. But some of the key ones that we looked to when we were talking about residential neighborhoods were the strong neighborhoods guideline, the home base guideline, and mobility and access. So those were some of those key elements, but all 7 of them played into every idea, issue, draft we looked at. In addition to that, the steering committee decided we needed to focus in even more on this particular set of regulations. And they set out 9, is it 9 or 8? I can never remember. I think it's 8 guiding principles. And these were the lenses that the working groups, the consultant team, and planning staff used to review and work on the draft code. So those are clarify and simplify this code. It's a code that was written in 1971 that had pieces and parts exchanged, replaced, added, deleted. So there was a lot of complex reading of the code that was necessary to interpret what it meant. What does it mean? That we needed to really focus our regulation on things that mattered to our community. And so listening at every one of those working group meetings and to the public during the process was very important. That we needed to preserve and protect the rights of property owners. So if you purchased a home in a certain type of neighborhood, there was an expectation that that neighborhood would continue in the same sort of character over time. That if the neighborhood consisted of narrow houses on narrow lots that had front doors and gable front facing facades, that that would continue into the future. Our current code doesn't do that. That we would prevent conflicts, not just between neighbors or adjacent land uses, but between different parts of the code for the city. So we have building codes and engineering codes and stormwater codes. So we needed to make sure that as we drafted, we were not creating inherent conflicts between our code, our zoning, and other codes. That we provided options and context for each type of zone district or use, and make sure that those fit in the right place. And we needed to maintain what we cared about. So if there was a particular style of neighborhood development that we really cared about and really was uniquely Billings, we needed to code for that, not for something else, or not something out of a standard or model zoning code. We also have gaps in our zoning. They are, some are big holes, some are little holes, but we found all the holes and we tried to fill those holes, at least with a framework or starter regulation. We'll hear some about that tomorrow, maybe, not tonight specifically. And then prosperity, to make sure that if we had businesses or types of economic foundations for our community, that we did everything that we could to make sure that those continued to grow and were stable in the future. So that's where we started. This is where we are. After 6,500 hours of volunteer time, VISTA member time, I don't even count planning staff time in there. Don't even count consultant time in there. So that's just the volunteer hours that were given to us. We decided instead of calling our neighborhoods residential zones, because they're more than residences, we decided to call them neighborhoods. And we didn't just change the name, we changed it so that we were coding for the character of Billings. Part of that was a character assessment that was done through the consultant team over about 6 months in 2018. And it identified kind of 3 major neighborhood styles in Billings. First one, we weren't too creative, we called Billings First Neighborhood. And the next one was the mid-century style. We discovered the ranch-style home, we discovered 2-car garages and wider lots, shorter houses, and we said, okay, that's N2, the next or mid-century neighborhood. Then our most recent style was more of a suburban residential zone, and so we called that N3. Now within those 3 neighborhood districts, there are also housing choices that were kind of sprinkled in there. You know, some at the end of the block, some in the mid-block. So you'd find a fourplex house in mid-block off of Poly Drive. Who knew? But it works. Those fit in the neighborhood. And so we said, okay, we need to be more careful with our multifamily zoning. Let's code for the different choices of multifamily housing. And so we came up with 3 multifamily districts to go along with the N1, the N2, and the N3. So NX1, mixed residential 1, mixed residential 2, and mixed residential 3. Yeah, it's not very creative, but we, you know, getting back to the basics and keeping it simple was part of our charge from the steering committee. We also left the residential manufactured home zone pretty much as it is, that would be a zone district specifically for manufactured homes. We freshened it up to make it for Billings. The other major change in the zone districts from our current method is that we're not going to use lot area to determine how many dwelling units you can put on a piece of property. That is a major change for our community, but it brings us forward to this moment because many communities no longer use the area formula for determining how neighborhoods should be developed. They use a lot width instead, or they just simply say anything between 1 and 4 family can be built in this neighborhood. You do what you want on your lot. We don't really have any structure to that. That's a little bit too much chaos, I think. So instead we said, okay, in the N1 zone, which is our first neighborhood, or new neighborhoods that are built like the old neighborhoods, the 1 and 2 family dwellings are predominant. There aren't any, if there are 3 family or 4 family or multifamily, then those are usually those single lots at corners or maybe a couple of blocks. And so we coded for that instead of mixing it all together. So the first neighborhood is a narrow lot. It's deep. It can be as narrow as 20 feet wide, some of the older parts of Billings. But normally they're between 25 and 50 feet wide. They're about 140 feet deep, but we didn't do a lot depth on that, just a lot width. You can do 1 or 2 family on that, and it can be attached or detached. So a front house, back house, very common in Billings, or a duplex that's long to the street. We increased the lot coverage requirement or allowances from 40% in the current code, generally for this zone type, to 60%, because we're not saying lot area is a necessary thing anymore. So we're saying you can build a little more on that smaller lot and not have to get a variance. The other part of this code that's very different is that we're saying we're going to build to the street. Instead of minimum setbacks, like can't get any closer, we're going to say this space here is where you put your building. We're not saying absolutely here or here, but it has to be within that first 20 feet of the lot. But you can't set it back farther because that starts to make the street less sociable, less walkable. Traffic tends to speed up if they don't have a frame on that street. So neighborhoods where the house has been set way far back tend to have faster traffic. So we said, okay, that's important. We need to say, for the character of these neighborhoods, building within this area is important. The other thing that's important for these first neighborhoods was that most of them didn't have a garage on the front. Sometimes it was at the back of the house and it has a long driveway. You'll see a couple of those on the screen. So if you have a driveway at the street, the garage still has to be back off the street. Or loaded from the alley, absolutely perfect. That's what alleys are for, to provide vehicle access to the private backyard. The other part of it was that we needed to be able to see a door from the street. We needed to be able to see a certain amount of windows from the street. So it's not a lot, but it just says there has to be a door, and there has to be at least 15% of that front part of the house has to have windows. So I don't know what a standard house facade measurement might be, but if it was 25 feet wide and it was 10 feet tall, that's 250 square feet, not including the gable. And then so 15% of that would have to be in windows. So that's like 37 square feet of windows. It's usually a picture window and 2 side lights. So those were important parts of character for the first neighborhoods that we wrote into this code. Any questions? Okay. Zooming along. The mid-century neighborhood is a little different. The lots were wider. For the most part, they were still, medium-sized lots. They weren't huge lots, but they were a little wider. The houses were shorter, 1.5 to 2 stories, generally, not super tall. Started to see the garage on the front facade, usually just a 2-car garage. Never more than about 35% of that facade on the street had garage doors. But the houses tended to be shorter. Sometimes they had alley loading garages still, or detached garages out in the back. So we coded it for that. They also had the side carport deal going on, a lot of that. So we allowed for that to happen. We also said, these are a little further back from the street, so we made that build-to range a little narrower and a little further back than the first neighborhoods. And we allowed that the facade of the house could be much wider and facing the street. Still transparent or windows, doors and windows that face the street so they can be seen. And then the suburban neighborhood was the last building style and neighborhood style that we did in Billings. And this is more of the current, what's going on now, the new construction in the Heights or West End. And this is a much larger lot, usually a much larger house, usually more garage doors that face the street. There are generally no alleys platted in these subdivisions at all. We still didn't go with lot area, because not all of these lots are, at least 9,600 square feet. Some of them are smaller, but they do tend to have larger houses. So we coded for this. We said, okay, in this zone district, we're going to have a simple front setback, no build-to range, because there was no common building to range in these neighborhoods. It's generally all 20 feet or more from the street. We're going to allow more garage door openings to face the street. Up to half the front of the house could be garage door openings. So if you have a 60-foot wide house to the street, then 30 feet of that could be in garage doors. Not the garage interior space, the door itself. And that will usually accommodate at least a 3-car garage door openings. So we did go with lot width for this, but not lot area. So this is more like our existing code than the first two zone districts. So as we were doing our character assessments, there was these little places that kept showing up on our streets, in our neighborhoods. And they weren't isolated, they were kind of from each other. They kind of made sense at the time that those subdivisions and neighborhoods were being built, that the corner properties that were much larger tended to have these apartment houses, fourplexes or threeplexes on the corners. Sometimes they were mid-block, like the lower left picture. That's mid-block, 1200 block of Poly Drive on the north side. That's a sixplex. It looks like just a big house. There's no real definition to the outside of these buildings that says apartments. It looks just like a big house. So we said, let's figure out if we can write a code to make these okay where they are. And so we called it mixed use, mixed residential 1. So it could just be one big house, or it could have up to 4 units in it, but nothing more. Not a sixplex, not an 8. It's just the 1 to 4 range, that small multifamily development. Where we found them, we coded them on the map. Where we knew that they were going to happen in the near future, we coded them on the map. Generally, these were existing residential 6,000 lots or some residential multifamily restricted lots. We did also find them in R7000 and even some in R9600. So where we found them, we coded for those, particularly the ones that have been there since the 50s and fit in well with the neighborhood. So that's the NX1. It does have those form requirements just like the N1. It has a build-to range. If you have to get a driveway off the street for a garage, it has to be narrow. It can't be like most of the street front facade. But the code says you need to choose to come around from the back if you can. If you can put in a little private street around the back, that's okay. If you can do it in a courtyard shape and have the parking in off the courtyard, that's okay too. But all different options to get that done for a 1 to 4 family development. You also can do them in attached townhomes. I don't want to use the word row house here. That has a different connotation than other places. So we say townhome or townhouse because they are unit ownership. They own the ground and the sky, and they share a wall. So we're allowing that in this code to be lot lines to be created for each one of those units. So they could actually even be simple ownership instead of unit ownership. So the next step up from there is the NX2, which we said, okay, those are the ones that are usually at least 2 units in the building, but could be up to 8. So a duplex up to an 8plex, sometimes has single buildings on a lot, sometimes in a group of 4 or more buildings, but still it's more intense use than the NX1, but it's not quite a huge apartment complex. So the NX2, keeping with the form requirements, requiring the rear loading garages through either a platted alley or a private drive that wraps the building. Also can do it in a courtyard arrangement, can do it as separate units in a courtyard arrangement. And then finally the NX3, which is the large apartment buildings or large apartment complexes like Hunters Point, Rimrock West, all the places that we know, the big apartment buildings, those are coded as NX3s. So where we found them, we coded them that way. Where we knew they were going to develop, we coded them that way. If they were already had the zoning in place, We didn't upzone people's property just because they told us they had an idea. They actually had to have the zoning in place for that use before we would code it that way on the map. And finally, the residential manufactured home zoning district. Right now, this code was written after many of the manufactured home parks that exist within the core of the city were developed. In my little research that I have done on the number of manufactured homes that we have in Billings, it's less than 3,000 right now. 80% of those are in manufactured home parks, and about half of those manufactured home parks don't have manufactured home zoning. So, but we do have a part of the code that we're using now to say, okay, if you're not in the right zone, then you can replace this manufactured home over and over and over again. So it almost defeats the purpose of keeping it miszoned by having that provision. So where we found manufactured home parks, particularly the ones that have been there for a long time and were never going to be abandoned, we zoned them manufactured home. But we also adjusted and refreshed this code to reflect the existing character of many of our manufactured home parks, which is not many of them provide more than 3,000 square feet of lot area per unit. Not very many. And many of them are way over lot coverage because of that. And we're keeping the safety setbacks in place, which is the 8 feet from the side property lines, because manufactured homes are built to a different code than site-built homes. So for fire safety, they are set back a little further than site-built homes. But we reduced the lot area to 3,000 and increased the lot coverage to about 50%. And that is the end of my presentation on tonight's section 27-300 and 27-1000. We didn't go far into 27-1000, which is the uses and use standards, just because we're not really changing that much uses in the residential zone districts. We will talk about 3 particular topics tomorrow that are filling the gap that we have in our code for residential zones, and that includes the short-term rentals and the accessory dwelling unit housing choice, as well as the planned neighborhood development, which is a tool that we, with the help of our consultants, created to help the edges of the city mesh well when they come into the city. So areas that are within the limits of annexation and want to come into the city, this is a tool that we created for them to use to create new neighborhoods for the city of Billings. So tonight is just the first night of several sessions of this public hearing, and I'd be happy to answer any of the commission's questions or questions from the audience.
That was very helpful, thank you.
Good.
That's really helpful.
Is there anybody who has, oh yeah, Randy.
I was just gonna say, Mike mentioned for those that want, or people listening, that there are lots of diagrams in here.
Oh, yes.
And make it way easier to understand what a lot of what you just talked about is about. And a handyman chart shows them on the it's to read clear, and diagrams to explain what the terms mean, show up there.
Okay, yes, the actual code is online at project-recode.com//code-outline. And all of the different zone district sections are on there. There's 2 for each section because we didn't write just one code. That would have been too easy, right? So we wrote 2 codes, one for the city and one for the county. The County Zoning Commission will start their public hearings next month in August. We'll probably have a combined city and county zoning commission hearing on the common features that will apply in both jurisdictions, and that would be for signs, landscaping, and off-street parking. They're very similar for both the city and the county, so we'll do a joint meeting for those code sections. Probably not until September, though.
I'm sorry, the audience needs to speak into the microphone because it doesn't come through on the live feed.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll run the microphone out there then for everybody. So Randy's question for the live feed was that there's actually a lot of charts and diagrams that make this code read very easy, and it's very convenient for people to get into it and actually utilize it versus the old code. We really needed Nicole and the magic decoder ring to help us understand where that would have been found. This code is very modernized, and the other thing I've appreciated about both the county and city portions is they seam together so nicely. I mean, they're written not separate, they're written together to function so that they can work together, even though one applies to the county and one applies to the city specifically. So I really appreciate that part. So I'm going to go ahead and set the microphone up here, and if we have any questions, we can come up and use the microphone.
Okay, I've been asked to say that there's also a side-by-side comparison map that's on project-recode.com under zoning map comparison. And it shows you the existing zoning of every parcel and the proposed zoning of every parcel. I keep a running tabulation of any corrections that either I find, staff finds, or the public finds. We have done that 7 times. We've updated that map 7 times. The last group of corrections is still sitting in my inbox, waiting for the final to be produced for our public hearing. We will have a separate public hearing on the map. So if you don't know your zoning and you want to know what it is, it's a good place to find out, and to find out what the proposed zoning is. We have tried to keep neighborhoods, a character, and styles of development intact in the community through these 3 or 6 new zoning districts. So if we made a mistake, we will correct it. Anybody else who wants to come up and ask a question or have a comment?
Miles Egan with Berkshire Hathaway Forward Realtors. Nicole, if you would clarify, at one point there was going to be a limitation in an R9600 zone to limit the size of the lots. We've found the real demand and necessary size to accommodate the larger homes. Let's use River Rock subdivision as an example. Our 20 to 25,000 square foot homes for highly customized residential housing are quite large, so they need large lots. So will we be able to go ahead and develop those 20,000 to 25,000 square foot lots in the new zone? N3, yeah.
Yes, we did have originally in the draft, before the urban initiative working through, a maximum lot size for
Yeah.
N3. That was removed.
Okay.
The urban initiative group felt that it would cause too much problem with, not just with existing lots in our R96 zone, that some of them are quite large.
Yeah.
But, kind of gave some protection to those larger lots.
Okay.
So the zone max.
All right. Because there is a large need for both size lots on city services. So, thank you for answering that. Another question, if you could clarify, some of the apartment complexes that we have now and have been building over the last 10 years, is there going to be a requirement to have a rear load and additional street to come on the back side of those projects, which increases the cost of that project tremendously? Or will we still be able to do front load, single, double garages, ranchers, 2 stories? Are we going to have that rear access in addition to the front?
Not in addition. Existing developments will go forward. They will not necessarily be conforming to all of those form or site design requirements. They're not, we did a whole section, if you want to look at it, it's called proportionate compliance.
Okay.
And it's in section 271100. And it talks about when you're doing improvements to a project. It's already developed, and it doesn't comply with certain standards like landscaping or off-street parking and things like that. So there's going to be, if you approve it a certain percentage, then you probably have to do nothing. And then as you get more, then you might have to do more. But new projects really want that street, the public street, not an internal street, not like Hunter's Point, internal streets or some of the other projects that have these internal private roads. We want the public street to be activated with people and not their homes necessarily. So that's why that form requirement that we thought as a working group steering committee was a good way to make that happen.
Good, thank you.
Blaine Poplar, resident, real estate broker. So a lot of what I'm going to say is actually concerns that my clients have, as well as myself. I spent the last 25 years trying to understand the zoning code, and I was getting pretty good at it. So I'm not resentful that it's changing, but it's certainly a new start. I mean, a lot of it does cross over, but there's a lot of changes, and I and a whole bunch of other people were pretty comfortable with the old code, so that might tint my remarks just a little bit. You know, one thing that's coming more and more and more is dictating the form of how to build units, the form of your setbacks, the form of how many doors and windows you have. It seems like it's kind of pushing the limit of what zoning is, and my understanding is zoning is primarily a use, and one zoning allows one use or many, and different zoning allows a different use, but it hasn't in my, and I might be wrong, but it hasn't really dictated what the form of the buildings can be. And I know that as we worked on these buildings downtown zones, that we're kind of getting introduced to form-based zoning, more form than what was actually happening. And so I just think it's just kind of nibbling away at the rights of the landowner and the developer as we dictate more and more form. I also think that it's helping to drive all this residential development out of the city limits. When you go out in investment buildings, there's hundreds of houses being built outside the city limits. They may or may not still be in zoning. A lot of them aren't even in the county zoning. But it's obviously there's some burden that's causing these home builders and developers to be developing outside the city limits. I'd like to have some thought on what we might do to make it more attractive to develop in the city limits. Just a quick question. What year you can have the presentation on the more commercial zones?
That would be Thursday.
Pretty good. I want to also talk a little bit about the parking requirements that Miles mentioned. To mandate that garages have to go in the back of the multi-family development, or even, I think, even like duplexes like Twin Pine subdivisions, all have front garages and front driveways. That's really the norm right now for a lot of the building going on. To then mandate by a form that you have to have your parking, the garage, or access in the back, and not in the front, it's going to be more expensive per unit for these type of properties. And some of them, several $1,000s per unit to provide the additional paved alleyway when you've already got a paved street in front. And by continuing to increase the price through these form requirements, it affects the price that rental properties have to rent for. And some of our developers are trying to hold the line on expense and hold the line on rental rates, and that's going to make it very difficult. And I don't have any personal experience, but Greg, you could probably help me out with this question. How is it when we get a reasonably heavy snow, to have everything backloaded on, or about 20 foot wide alleyways? You know, it's not fair to ask the question.
I mean, from our experience so far, it's really not much different than any of our residential streets that we've dealt with, just because it's dealt with most recently. We didn't have snow removal in any of the residential areas, so it was kind of 6 on half dozen of others, was other than the current up and out the back. Now, as of the last couple of years, we have had some residential snow removal. Just a new point, it's getting really extreme.
We didn't have a lot of people's cars kind of out in the alleyway, or
Well, having got some alley design, modern alley design, I can tell you that there's some really good ways to do alleys, and there's some really cumbersome ways to do them. And if you do it wrong, you'll end up with people parking in the development.
and that's kind of what some of the concern is at. When it snows, we've got some cars that aren't out in the alley, or
Really been a non-issue.
pretty good. Another item that I'm a little surprised at and a little concerned at is the lack of awareness of the entire community as to what we're doing with this project. Whereas it really, it does affect every property or every real estate owner. Some of them will never know the difference, and it won't make any difference because it's already a building there, it's in compliance, and who cares if it's NX3 or RMFR, it really doesn't matter. But there's a lot of people that should be more aware of this, and I'm afraid that after this is said and done, and people have some reason or another to figure out what the zoning is, and it's no longer what it was when they bought the property, that there may be some noses hurt feelings. Some people may think that they've had something taken away from them. And I'm pretty amazed. I spoke, about noon today, I spoke with 3 different people. 2 of them are actually real estate agents. The other one's a fairly large property owner. And individually, I asked them, I said, do you know what the recode is? Huh? No. What is it? I said, well, we're going to get zoning, both city and county zoning, completely rewritten, and there'll be some significant change. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, so that's people in the real estate business. Another person who's probably going to be a developer when he gets around to it, but just totally unaware of it. And I'm afraid that there's going to be some kickback from the public once they figure it out. I don't know if there needs to be a letter sent out, or needs to be a public service announcement, or what, but so far, the amount of awareness isn't good. And like I said, I don't know exactly what would be the best way to increase awareness, but I think it's something that should be certainly considered. That's all I have to say today.
Would one of those sources of information, maybe
One of the sources of information possibly would be something in a realtor newsletter or meeting or something. I don't know what you have.
You know, that's an excellent point. Because there are several real estate publications out there. And also, somebody asked me just a couple of days ago, we were talking about this, they said, well, what's the Billings Association of Realtors position or take on it? And I haven't heard anything from the Billings Association of Realtors on the RICO, not one word, so that would probably also be a good way to get the word out, but yeah, I think.
be careful, you might end up chair of that committee if they form one.
Anyway, that's all.
I'll share it.
Thank you.
You have a lot of free time, Miles. Better ask Elaine about that.
Does anyone on Zoom have a comment or a response or anything they want to add?
Can you advertise the call-in number somewhere?
Oh, yeah. 237-6120. 237-6120.
Nicole? Your hands.
Oh. That's okay, at Zoom.
Just curious if there would be a way, like right now we have a variance protocol kind of thing. Is that going to be part of this? Is that something that's going to be allowed? And maybe that would help with the concerns that Wayne and his peers might have if there was a process.
Certainly, the new code will have administrative procedures. We also have process and flow chart diagrams in there where we don't rely on all words right now. We'll have those. And there will be variances. There'll be administrative adjustments for minor deviations from those different form requirements. So you don't have to go through a variance to go 1% over a lot coverage, for example. There will be zone change processes, there will be special review processes, and text amendment, map amendment processes. So that's all going to be in there too. We will cover that in another public hearing. We're kind of starting at the beginning and going towards the end. I will tell you that the central business district zone and the eBird zones are essentially staying the same. Those are not changing at all. We're just kind of plug them into where they needed to be in the new form structure.
Are you gonna leave the entryway zones as they are?
Okay, the question was, are we leaving the entryway zones as they are? No. There will be, there's a new lineup of commercial zone districts, and entryway zones will be incorporated into one of those 6 new districts. So, depending on the use. So, for example, entryway light industrial, there isn't a lot of industrial uses in those light industrials, so they'll probably become more of a mixed use zone. Or depending on what the uses are, it could be a heavy commercial zone instead. So those are all changing up. And we're not going to have the medical corridor anymore. We're not going to have the South 27th Street District anymore. Those are old style performance-based zone districts. So those will also go into one of our new commercial or public zone districts. So we'll cover all that on Thursday. And we do this again. Tomorrow we'll cover accessory dwelling units, short-term rentals, planned neighborhood developments, and more of the uses and use standards for residential districts.
Do you have a comment?
Having had the opportunity to sit on this commission since there was a vacancy, I felt like it was a good opportunity, since I've been able to work with the steering committee and the urban issues committee for the last 2.5 years on the rework of this code. And Blaine, while I completely agree there are a ton of people that still do not understand what's been happening and what's been being talked about, because it has been a lengthy process, and I do think over time people kind of, you hear it once and then you kind of forget about it. I do think that I have to commend the planning division for the efforts that they have made in making this a very, very public process, including monthly meetings that have been open to the public in several different in both the steering committee and in the different task forces that have been meeting. I mean, as Nicole had mentioned, there was over 6,500 hours, or 65, how many hours was it?
6,500 hours,
Do you guys-
volunteer hours.
I would be surprised if it's not double that. I mean, it has been extensive, the amount of time that's gone in. Presentations done to the Home Builders Association, presentations done to the Realtors, and Landlords Association. I mean, I honestly do not know how in a community this size and in these times that we're living in, how it couldn't have been communicated more. There's always going to be those people. We've seen it so many times. A new building code is adopted usually every 3 years or so, and we may be receiving information of what that new building code is going to look like a year or better in advance, and it's not until you go to pull that first permit that we see builders go, wait a minute, what? We got a new building code? And so to some degree, I think we're going to have some of that. What I can say, after reviewing this again and again and again, is that when we do get to that stage, this is a lot easier to use. It makes more sense. It's more modernized. Tables and charts and pictures just make things easier to understand. So for those people who are going to be new developers possibly, I'd sure rather have had something like this than what we had when we started trying to do some of our projects, 15 years ago. So we have a caller on the line. One moment, as Robin patches you in, putting on my radio DJ voice. Hello, caller.
You hear us, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Can't hear.
Sir, if you mute your device that you're watching, then you won't hear the delay and you'll be able to speak more effectively.
Yeah, that's great. I just muted it.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm actually a real estate broker from out the state. We're investing in a property in Billings, and just had a question or consideration. Nicole, you had said the N1X, 2 and 3 will be houses that were converted to apartment. Kind of looking at the zoning, will there be consideration for variance on these houses that were converted to apartment to then be split off on their own fee simple lot? And you will then follow the N1X1, 2, and 3 zonings for the new development.
Okay, that's, I think, kind of a complex question. What you're saying is, let's say you build 8 units in a row. Is that what you're saying? And then you want to create lot lines between each of those 8 units so that they have a fee simple lot rather than a unit ownership of a larger lot. And would that put them in a different zone district than the NX2? I don't think we wrote the code that way. I'd have to look at it again. If you leave your phone number with Robin, I can certainly call you back tomorrow once I've read the code a couple more times.
So that was a question we can't answer. Are there any others like that out there in the audience this evening? No?
Okay.
Are there anything from our online Zoomers? If they have any comments or concerns or questions or feedback?
Elizabeth, Leslie, Woody? Any additional comments?
No, I would just echo, I believe that was Ray was talking about. All the work that's been put in, not only with our consultants, but all the volunteer hours that have gone into this, and multiple meetings that have been had, the outreach that's been done to contact, whether it's builders, realtors, or all involved parties. I just echo what Greg said.
Thank you, Woody. Woody Woods, who's the chair of our City County Planning Board. President, I should say. Right.
I don't think there's much else to discuss, and if there's no questions, do we just adjourn the meeting at this point? Because we're not taking any action on any of these items.
No. Just think about what you heard tonight, and then for tomorrow night, if you have suggestion that you want to offer up for consideration by the whole commission, you can do that.
Okay.
The website, the code outline, and the drafts, maybe just tell the public where they can find that information.
Okay, so all of this information can be found on projectrecode.com, right?
Project-recode.com.
Project-recode.com.
Yeah.
Go there, hang out, check out the map, click on your property. It's all there, all the pretty pictures too. So, if there's nothing else for this evening, I move for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, any discussion, Dan?
None.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, let's go home. Thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening. Appreciate it.
Good meeting, Greg.